Kaleidoscope by Preston Wade. Read by Brandon Visser. Produced by VisserVoice.com. Join Preston and his guardian angel Hattrick in an imaginative coming-of-age memoir in which they travel to Latin America on a budget to learn Spanish, only to be absorbed by a mysterious vice in disguise. Witness a modern retelling of the Cherokee legend of the invisible battle of good and evil occurring inside each one of us. Edited by Sarah Garnett. This book was written by Preston Wade whilst traveling and living on land taken from the following tribes: the Yakima, the Wenatchee, the Puyallup, the Duwamish, the Spokane, the Seminole, the Miccosukee, the Kalispel, the Wasco, Los Pampas, and Los Comechingones. Author's note: the protagonist, Preston, is a fictionalized version of the author, Preston Wade. The author writes about drug use in this story only as a metaphor for other life experiences. Many of the experiences which Preston the character undergoes are completely fictional. This book is meant for people of the age of 18 and above, and the contents are not meant to be used as advice. This book contains detailed descriptions of drug use, some violence, and some erotic themes. Inspired by The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. Chapter 1. An old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. He said, "A fight is going on inside me," he told the young boy. "A fight between two wolves. The dark one is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego." He continued, "The light wolf is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you, grandson, and inside every other person on the face of this earth." The grandson pondered this for a moment and then asked, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" The old Cherokee smiled and simply said, "The one you feed." Chapter 2. Beginning of Life. It was a midsummer morning on the first day of July in 1991, just a few days before the fireworks were due for their big annual show. George H.W. Bush was basking in high approval ratings after beginning and ending the Gulf War in a matter of months. Patriotism was at an all-time high since World War II. The national colors of red, white, and blue were seen on whirling pinwheels on every lawn, and on shirt pins of elderly women in the small-town grocery store of Sandpoint, Idaho. Although at the time, his public approval was historically high, and it seemed he would be re-elected, George H.W. Bush's term was coming to an end. But someone else's term was just beginning. A baby boy by the name of Preston came into the world on that hot evening on the first day of July. His parents always told him that it took the world a few days to find out about his birth, which is why the fireworks didn't happen until the 4th of July. That was just one example of how Preston had a privileged childhood, even by the standards of the day. Preston's parents did everything in their power to make his early years magical and full of wonder. The family spent many afternoons together in a canoe on the lake, where they would often see beavers building their dams, and a love for hiking was instilled in the children throughout their frequent visits to the wilderness with their parents, Daryl and Jean. Every Wednesday evening, Preston's older siblings, George and Ashley, turned their living room into a makeshift court where the entire family played volleyball together. Even Mac, the black lab, joined in. Ashley was the oldest, and quite independent, with 3 years between her and George. Like many firstborn girls, Ashley assumed the role of the family leader from a young age. She usually found a way to make George and Preston cede to her. A natural athlete, she excelled as a gymnast and acrobatic cheerleader. George and Preston fought frequently over the computer. While Preston played games on the computer, George actually created his own games while teaching himself how to code from a young age. George was the smartest of the three kids, but his grades did not reflect that. He found schoolwork to be tedious and an insult to his intelligence. Preston, being the youngest, often sought out the company of his siblings, whether it be for homework or someone to play with. George played baseball with Preston from time to time, but when he approached Ashley for company, she suggested he run 5 laps around the block, alone. Chapter 3. Sandpoint. Sandpoint is one of many tiny towns bejeweling the shores of the infamously beautiful treasure called Lake Pend Oreille in the northern panhandle of Idaho. The lake itself lies nestled in between the Selkirk Mountains to the west and the Cabinet Mountains to the east. Sandpoint lies smack dab in the middle of the Idaho Panhandle, 30 miles or 50 kilometers east of the Washington border, 30 miles west of the Montana border, and about 65 miles or 100 kilometers south of the British Columbia Canadian border. Thanks to the dense population of kokanee salmon, the landlocked form of sockeye salmon residing in the waters at the time, Lake Pend Oreille teemed with giant record-breaking rainbow trout. The lake is the largest and deepest in Idaho, having been formed naturally over millions of years of the glacier earth dance, just like numerous other lakes in the region. With 111 miles, or 177 kilometers of shoreline, it made up its own little world, of which Preston was a very content inhabitant. The summers in Sandpoint are dry and warm, with the constant presence of the cooling waters of the lake. Oftentimes, Preston spent hot afternoons doing cannonballs off the dock at Lake Pend Oreille. Sometimes his father took him for canoe rides on the lake to lesser visited coves, where they saw beavers busy building their homes. Winter lasts a bit longer than summer at this latitude, and the Sandpoint winters are blessed with abundant snow in town and in the surrounding mountains. Preston took advantage of the bountiful powderings to sled down the neighbor's hill. Chapter 4. Cal and Hattrick. For Preston, life was splendid with friends like Cal, Hattrick, and his own imagination. Cal was one of Preston's best friends. They originally met in first grade and had 5 years to tease a friendship. The day they met, Cal invited Preston to look inside his backpack. "I left this pouch of milk in here last week." Preston peered into Cal's backpack and was shocked to see a plastic bag of milk expanded like a balloon with off-white milk inside. "That's gross and cool," Preston said to Cal. "Let's be friends," Cal replied. From that moment on, they were together like peanut butter and jelly. In many ways, Preston and Cal were on the same level of silliness. On opposite day at school, Cal and Preston wore their underwear on the outside of their pants. But whenever Preston did something particularly crazy, like front flipping off of the porch onto a pile of dirt below, Cal would push his glasses back up onto his nose and chant, "Prestomania, he's insania!" Cal had a way of encouraging Preston's antics without joining in, and Preston loved a good audience. Hattrick, Preston's imaginary friend, had the form of a 12-year-old girl with curly red hair which bounced like forest vines as she moved. She had existed as long as Preston could remember. She was part spirit guide, part companion, and part guardian angel. Although she was imaginary, she was still very real. "Why don't the others see you?" Preston asked. "I'm only visible to you," Hattrick replied. "How come?" "Because I'm here just for you." One hot summer day that happened to be Preston's 10th birthday, Hattrick and Preston walked along a trail along the lake's rim. "When the others in your family teach you about Jesus, they are really teaching about me. You can still call me Hattrick, though. They call me Jesus, but between us, I go by the name Hatrick. So, are you Jesus or are you Hatrick? She just smiled and said it didn't matter. After all, it is just a name. Do my parents see Jesus like I see you? They have a different way of relating to me. Everyone has their distinct mediums of interacting with the celestial realm. Hatrick led Preston to a dock on the lake. Tiny white flies called ash aphids were doing their usual airborne dance, flying up and down in elliptical patterns over the water. Hatrick was clothed in a pair of denim overalls, yet she was still translucent, while Preston only wore swimming trunks and sandals. The two friends laid down on their bellies with their heads hanging off the edge of the dock to peer into the clear water. In the place where their shadows touched the water, they could see all the way to the lake bottom. Hatrick's hair fell to the water's level in a graceful helix, touching the surface without disturbing their view. Now and then a fish would swim up close, and the two pals could admire the beauty of the vertebrae. "What do you learn from your teachers in school about our Earth?" Hatrick asked. "That it's a spherical planet of water with some patches of dry land. The planet spins on an axis, creating day and night, while simultaneously orbiting around the sun. While orbiting, the tilt changes, creating longer days in the summer and shorter days in the winter," Preston replied. "What if I told you that there are actually a series of spinning platforms under us, which create the sensation that we are orbiting the sun?" Hatrick posited. "Tectonic plates. You're talking about tectonic plates. My teacher, Miss Stark, explained that to us," Preston replied. Hatrick furrowed her brow and responded. "Who controls the tectonic plates?" "They're moved by the blind force of gravity." "That's where your teachers are wrong. Under the so-called tectonic plates are actually machines which turn the plates, creating the sensation of the sun moving from its place of sunrise to sunset." There was a long pause, and Preston asked, "Why don't I feel the Earth spinning?" "Depending where you are on Earth, the spinning is more noticeable." After a long pause, Preston noticed the ash aphids had begun to hover just above the water. A fish swam to the surface and ate one. "Why do the ash aphids fly so close to the water where they get eaten by the fish?" Preston asked. "They're fulfilling their dharma, or duty, along with the rest of us," replied Hatrick. After watching in silence for a little while, Preston asked Hatrick, "Do you have magical powers?" "I have abilities you don't have," Hatrick responded. "But to me, they are not magical. They're just within my control. If your great-grandparents saw you using the internet, they'd consider you to possess magic." "Would you use your powers to make me rich?" Preston asked quickly before he could stop himself. "Please?" he added, remembering his manners. Hatrick paused and looked towards her human. Preston avoided her eyes in embarrassment. "I am not your employee. I am your guardian and your friend," replied Hatrick with a little smile. Back home, George suggested he and Preston climb out their bedroom window onto the roof to eat lunch. They sometimes did this when they were feeling adventurous or contemplative. Hatrick sat near the edge with her legs dangling off, holding a book in her translucent hands. After finishing his pizza, Preston stood up suddenly to climb back inside the house. That moment triggered a quick and unfortunate series of events. He stepped on a loose shingle, and his foot slipped out from underneath him. That sent him sliding down the roof slope on his belly toward the edge. Hatrick tucked her book into her belt, and she reached out as if she could stop Preston from falling. She calculated quickly that she wouldn't be able to block the fall, so she jumped into the space between the roof and the ceiling. Using her book as a hammer, she pounded on the end of a nail so that it stood up in the path where Preston was sliding. Just as his feet approached the edge of the roof, the head of the rusty nail caught on Preston's chest, digging through his skin like the rudder of a boat cutting through the water, eventually catching and stopping his fall. After helping him roll over, George supported Preston, who was screaming, into the house to their mother Jeannie. The gash on his chest left skin on either side of it curling away like a scroll, but it was actually a shallow cut, spanning half of his lower abdomen. It took Preston about 20 minutes to calm down, but with Mr. Rogers on the television, Jeannie was able to clean him. Chapter 5. Move to Yakima, Washington. At the age of 10, Preston and his siblings moved with his parents to Yakima, a small city in the desert of central Washington, to be closer to his aging grandmother. It was missing the charm of small-town northern Idaho. There was a serious gang problem, with rival gangs marking graffiti on all available surfaces. The surrounding hills were brown and ugly in comparison to Sandpoint's evergreens. Preston's childhood friend Cal came along for a visit to Yakima. The two friends went swimming at a public pool. Cal left his glasses tucked inside his shoe in the locker room. After swimming, Cal went to his shoes to put his glasses back on. The lenses of his glasses had been scratched with a coin, rendering them impossible to see through. Later, Preston cried to Hattrick, "Why do I have to live in this horrible town? Cal and I swam all our lives in Sandpoint, and our stuff was never vandalized." Tears were pouring out of his red eyes, and a vein appeared on his temple. "It'll only make sense when you're older," Hattrick replied sadly. Chapter 6. Insomnia. When Preston was 14, he began experiencing insomnia. He would lie awake all night wanting to sleep, and he tried all sorts of natural remedies. He ate oatmeal with milk just before bed. He covered all the tiny lights in his room. He pleasured himself. Still, sleep often escaped him. "What's wrong with me? Why can't I sleep 8 hours straight?" he asked Hattrick. "Nothing is wrong with you. You just follow a different sleep schedule." Hattrick tucked the covers in around Preston and ran her fingers through his hair. Preston rested his head on his hand and gazed into Hattrick's eyes for a moment. Hattrick's red hair had been replaced by thin, coiling serpents who were poised to attack, with tiny drops of poison on their fangs. "Snakes!" Preston hollered. "Where?" Hattrick asked, surprised. "You have snakes for hair! Or you did!" Staring at Hattrick again, Preston was perplexed to see that Hattrick's visage had returned to normal. "You've just had your first hallucination. That means you're seeing something others can't," Hattrick began to explain. "You will be labeled as crazy by some, and you just may go crazy if you don't sleep 8 hours a night. That is, you're prone to hallucinate so much you may struggle to exist in the human world," Hattrick continued. "Where do the voices come from?" Preston asked. "They're disembodied spirits and ghosts looking for someone to channel them." Chapter 7. Meeting Seth. One day after school, Preston was looking for his imaginary friend Hattrick. He walked through the entire house, investigating all of Hattrick's favorite spots. Below the spiral staircase, he found himself face to face with a strange man. "Who are you?" "Seth," came the reply. While Hattrick had a translucent white glow to her, Seth's 65-year-old frame had a green highlight. "What are you doing in my house?" "Hattrick sent me. She said it's time for us to meet." Preston was a bit vexed. Hattrick had mentioned other spirit guides, angels, and demons, but she didn't prepare Preston to be face to face with one. Seth was a man with hollow cheeks and a prickly white beard. He wore a cowboy hat and had a flower tucked into the front pocket of his shirt. "Did Hattrick ever mention that she had a brother?" Seth asked. "No." "Typical Hattrick. She always acted like the world revolves around her." In response, Preston said, "Could you summon Hattrick? I would rather she introduced me to... Before Preston could finish the sentence, Seth disappeared, and Hattrick showed up. "Why didn't you tell me you had a brother?" Preston asked with an air of incredulity. "Some things are better left unmentioned." "He told me that you sent him. Is that true?" "Yes." "Well, what's his deal? Why did he visit me?" Preston asked. "He's looking for someone to live through. He wants to be your guide." "Should I let him guide me?" "Why did you send him?" "Just be aware that he and I have very different lifestyles. The company you keep defines who you are. Seth has the keys to the heavens, but there is a steep price to pay if you decide to peek into the celestial realms. I wanted the two of you to meet so that you know you have the freedom to choose your guardian angel." With those words, Preston just stood still in silence for a moment. Hattrick opened her glowing arms and gave Preston a hug, running one hand up and down his back in circles. Preston felt an energy and a peace unlike any other in Hattrick's embrace. Chapter 8. Hallucinations. Throughout high school, Preston's insomnia continued, and there were a few more instances in which Preston, after another sleepless night, hallucinated. Sometimes he saw a dragon in traffic while waiting for a ride home from school. He saw his English teacher's eyes fall from her head and multiply. The hallucinations were absurd and sometimes grotesque, but rare enough to not cause worry, and it was easy for Preston to tell that they were just the result of a delirious, sleep-deprived mind. His father bought him an over-the-counter sleep aid, which did the trick, but Preston didn't like the idea of taking it regularly. Preston loved adventuring with Hattrick in his dreams, and Hattrick never appeared during medicated dreams. His dreams lost their reality and sharpness when medicated. Sure, when he took the meds, he got tired and slept deeply, but he also struggled to wake up in the mornings and felt sluggish for the majority of the day after taking them. Getting enough sleep didn't seem valuable if it meant being even more tired and less lively than getting little sleep. Chapter 9. Bicycle. Preston discovered the joy of bicycle travel. During his final year of high school in 2009, he decided to make his bicycle his primary mode of transportation. He rode 9 miles, or 14 kilometers, daily. One weekend, he packed on his camping gear and pedaled all the way to the summit of White Pass at 4,500 feet, or 1,371 meters of elevation, a trip of 100 miles, or 160 kilometers total, done in 2 days. While spending all day pedaling, he enjoyed doing conversions in his head between miles to kilometers and Fahrenheit to Celsius. Hattrick flew at Preston's side, soaring and weaving figure eights while shouting for joy. During the summer between high school and college, he pedaled from his home in Yakima to Seattle, crossing the world-famous Chinook Pass, connecting western and eastern sides of the state. Chinook Pass enters Mount Rainier, or Mount Tahoma, National Park. In June, near the summit, he rode at the base of snowbanks rising 30 feet or 10 meters. He paused to fill his water bottle from a cascade of snowmelt falling off the mountainside, and the ice-cold water reaching his mouth sent him into a blissful mood. Hours later, he reached the summit where Mount Tahoma's proud triple peak glistened above the surrounding rocky crags. Never in his life before had he felt the rewards of the intertwined relation between his own effort and the distance he traveled. Chapter 10. Depression. Preston graduated high school and attended Yakima Valley College. During his second year, he experienced a major depressive episode for the first time in his life. Growing up, he loved playing in the snow, but when he started college, the cold winter only depressed him. It was the autumn of 2011. He called his mentor and friend Kyle. "The drudgery of day-to-day life is too much. I'm overwhelmed by the sensation that life will never be enjoyable. Isn't your everyday life too bleak to bear? You and I both know that's not true. Sorrow remains for a night, but joy comes in the morning. God wants us to live joyful lives, Kyle responded. People like Kyle held space for Preston while he was depressed. Kyle and Preston met in Wesley Heights Church in the West Valley of Yakima. Suddenly, Preston realized it had been weeks since he had consulted his friend Hattrick. Arriving home from college, he called out, "Hattrick, I'm sorry I forgot about you all this time. Where are you?" Gradually, in the corner of the room, Hattrick appeared, faint at first. "I've been miserable these past few weeks, and I've missed you. I can't believe I forgot to call out to you. I'm sorry." "I'm happy to see you again, though you don't have to apologize. I have other tasks to keep me busy," Hattrick responded. The two embraced, and Preston ran his hands through Hattrick's red hair. After the hug, they sat across from each other on the floor. Preston put his feet on Hattrick's lap, and Hattrick put her feet on Preston's. The two massaged each other's feet. "Why am I so blue? Why can't I cheer up?" asked Preston. "It's normal in your human lives to experience highs and lows. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim, I encourage you to give thanks for some trials and ask God what you ought to learn during this season." "So, I'm going to keep feeling blue? How long will this last?" "It'll last as long as it will last. The only thing I can promise is that your season of depression is temporary, and it's teaching you an important lesson. It's not happening to you, it's happening for you, to transform you and guide you." Hattrick's eyes grew wet as a tear collected, growing larger until the weight caused it to fall, landing on her lap. She felt Preston's pain. Being an empath, she was always in tune to how Preston felt. "Have you heard the quote, 'This too shall pass'?" "Yes," answered Preston. The origin of that quote was a task given from a powerful lord who asked his people to find something that can simultaneously make a rich person sad and a poor person happy. The result is that quote, "This too shall pass. Everything is temporary." Depression is a complicated disorder. Only those afflicted can understand what it's really like. Sometimes, depression manifests in a feeling of hopelessness. Other times, it manifests in an inability to feel any feelings at all. Preston believed that his human life was something that happened because his parents decided to reproduce. During these seasons of depression, he sometimes wished he had never been born. Life was thrust upon him against his will. He felt like a victim, as if his parents had forced him into a life he never asked for. Preston called out to the heavens in despair, "I didn't ask for this life! Take it from me, please!" One hopeless afternoon, Hattrick sat observing Preston, though Preston thought she had long since left. Hattrick knew that Preston was not in the mood to listen to advice, so Hattrick telepathically transferred a truth into Preston's being. "You did ask to be born. You even planned out your own life ahead of time." As this thought came to Preston, he resisted, saying to himself, "If I had chosen every detail of my life, I would have chosen to inherit a fortune at a young age and live closer to the equator where it never snows, and I would have been born more handsome." Autumn 2011 gradually turned into winter. The apple orchards in town dropped their yellow leaves, leaving bare trunks shivering, as naked as a skeleton in the cold, with the wind rattling their branches. Preston was taking introductory level biology, English, and math classes at Yakima Valley College. For his English course, he was reading The Follower by J. Sheem. Near the end of this essay, the author writes about adopting a scientific worldview. Only once all presuppositions are gone can one shed childish beliefs and truly enter the kingdom of reason as one enters the kingdom of heaven. Upon reading this simple argument for science, Preston experienced a bliss so profound it shook his body, bordering on delirious. There were invisible waves of electricity flowing through Preston's body. For most people, it would not seem normal to experience such ecstasy because of a good essay, but Preston was accustomed to being unusual. Science and the scientific method always made sense to Preston. He and his family believed that God established certain natural laws to which humanity has given names through science. Sometimes, Preston questioned how the Bible could be God's word when it was so obviously full of errors and contradictions. He asked his older brother George, "Did God create evolution, or did it just happen randomly?" "I think some higher power established the laws within our universe," George replied. "What name do you call that higher power? God?" "In our family, the name given is God. If we were born in India, we'd call it Brahma. If we were born in Iraq, we'd call it Allah." "And which of these names is the true name?" "I believe they are different names for the same being," George replied. Chapter 11. Faith and Science. Preston was taught that God was the giver of life, and the Bible was God's inspired word. In the Christian churches where Preston grew up, God was portrayed with male pronouns and a human-like personality. God experienced jealousy, rage, regret, compassion, grace, and forgiveness. Chapter 12. Bipolar Order. One day in February of 2012, Preston was not doing well in his college coursework. He spent some time studying for an upcoming quiz in his geography class, but he couldn't concentrate on the reading or absorb the material. The information he read came to him and then went away like water on a duck's back. He took his sleeping aid, lay down, and tried to sleep. In his fitful sleep, he felt the body of a demon scratching at his side, with jagged claws protruding from a feathered arm. It felt as real as the bed Preston was sleeping on. After sleeping for 2 hours, his alarm went off, and he went to class. He took the geography quiz, but knew while he was completing it that he would not pass it. After class, he called his father in tears. Daryl said, "Just get home. Forget your classes. I'll take you to our doctor." Dr. Swooley had been seeing Preston for several weeks, consulting about his depression. Arriving at the doctor, Preston said, "A demon tormented me last night, and I felt it trying to attack me. Would you please cast the demons out of me?" Dr. Swooley recognized this as a hallucination typical in people with bipolar disorder, and advised Preston's parents to have Preston go to a psychiatric hospital. After some goading from his parents, Preston signed paperwork to voluntarily check into the hospital for professional treatment. In the hospital, a doctor explained to Preston that his symptoms are common in people with bipolar order. This diagnosis is called bipolar disorder, but Preston chooses to call it by a more appropriate, positive name. When faced with his own depression, Preston asked God from inside the walls of a psychiatric hospital, "Why did you force me into this cruel, cold world?" He listened for an answer, but only heard the occasional drip of water from a nearby sink. After 10 days in the hospital, Preston was released. He had been taking 1,000 milligrams of Depakote, a mood stabilizer, and 2 milligrams of Haldol, an antipsychotic, daily. His first act of freedom was to walk home. The fresh air filled his lungs in a way it never had before. He felt like breathing the treated indoor air only permitted him to use a quarter of his lung capacity, while the fresh air reached deeper inside him, expanding his lungs as if they were muscles which needed stretching. He was still a bit depressed, but the depression was not crushing him anymore. He spent the rest of February and the entire month of March hibernating. He only left the house 3 times a week to sing in the college choir and to go to church on Sundays. He still rode his bicycle, but because he was heavily medicated, he felt like the brakes were lightly applied everywhere he rode. He was lazier, and reality didn't have the usual sharpness. Preston finished his associate's degree and moved to Wenatchee, Washington. He found an adequate dose of his medications, which allowed him to sleep without making him lazy. Hattrick even started to adventure in his dreams again. Chapter 13. Wenatchee Intro. As Preston arrived in Wenatchee, he decided to become a vegetarian. The geographical change was the perfect catalyst. In his Christian family, he was taught that the God of the Bible compromised and approved of killing animals only because of sin entering the world when Eve and Adam ate the forbidden fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Men ruling over women was also the result of sin. In God's original plan, there was no human or animal death, nor hierarchy between men and women. Preston became convinced that Christians ought to strive to reverse the effects of sin, not just accept them. Therefore, he chose to become vegetarian, then later vegan. Then came October 2014. Wenatchee is a small town in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. The state of Washington shares a border with Canada and has the Pacific Ocean on its western border. The western side of Washington state is abundantly green and usually has gray skies. The Cascade Mountain Range creates a rain shadow effect, meaning that the eastern side of Washington state is a desert. Wenatchee lies on the eastern slopes of the Cascades. The mountains in town are bare and brown at their base, with the trees near their summits. Chapter 14. Youth Intern. Preston obtained a job as a youth intern at Wenatchee Bible Church. With autumn in the northern hemisphere comes a kind of sunlight that feels sharper. A cool wind blew the dried leaves across the church parking lot, and the weight of autumn hit Preston hard. It was 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. There would be no more swimming at Bimbo Beach on the Columbia River until next summer. A hand squeezed Preston's shoulder. It was Pastor Brandon of Wenatchee Bible Church. "Want to cycle the loop together? We're both heading in the same direction." "Sounds like a plan," Preston replied. Pastor Brandon made Preston feel very welcome in the role of youth intern at the church. Being at this church seemed like being at a rock concert. The worship music was exceptional, since the head pastor, Brandon, was also a professional musician. Soon after joining the team of this church, Preston became known for leading the kids in dance during the last song of every church service. The last song was always upbeat. On the bicycle ride to their respective homes, Pastor Brandon said, "At some point during your year with us, we'd like to get you in the pulpit. Want to preach?" "I think I'm up for the challenge," Preston replied. "How are you adjusting to life in Wenatchee?" asked Brandon. "So far, so good. I found a lovely spot in the sand to do my workout routine." Pastor Brandon and Preston reached the junction on the Apple Capitol Loop Trail, where it splits off in different directions, and said goodbye. Chapter 15. Prayer. 3 days later, Preston got a call from the aquatics director of a local swimming pool. "We'd like you to come by for a second interview." 1 month later, Preston found himself sitting in the lifeguard tower. "Nice to meet you," Preston said to Sally, a patron. He worked part-time as a youth intern at Wenatchee Bible Church and part-time as a lifeguard/swim instructor/aquasize or water exercise instructor at this pool. Many of the patrons of the pool were 60-plus years old. One woman, Betty, arrived for her workout on Monday morning with some pain in her body. After getting to know her, Preston offered to pray for her healing. Betty accepted and together they said a short prayer for healing. Dear God in heaven, please heal Betty. Lift her pain and bring health to her body. In Jesus' name, amen. Betty got into the pool for her daily exercise. The following Wednesday, Betty returned to the pool and said to Preston, "Your prayer helped. On Monday, I had 0 pain after my exercise. I hadn't been pain-free in weeks." Preston was encouraged to know that their prayers had been answered. Chapter 16. Children. When he wasn't lifeguarding or teaching confirmation class, Preston found himself volunteering for recess at an elementary school. One Tuesday afternoon, he was playing with the kids during recess. "Stick your head here," Newton said. Newton was 5 years young. He pointed to a ditch in the grass where a pipe drained. Preston bent down so his head was hovering near the pipe. Newton ran up the grassy hill and yelled from the other end of the pipe, "Poopy-doody shooty!" He chuckled as he spoke every dirty word he knew. The innocent joy of children always made Preston's heart smile. Hatrick joined in the fun and games during recess, rolling down a grassy hill with the kids. "Volunteering at an elementary school is a great activity for both of us," Hatrick told Preston. Preston noticed Seth approaching the playground. He walked all the way to the slide where Preston was standing. As Seth stepped close to the end of a slide, a child flew out, lost their balance, and tumbled to the ground. "Hi, how are you?" Preston asked. "I'm a little lost. I had to come looking a long way to find you." Hatrick interjected with a severe tone. "Who invited you?" "Preston did," Seth said with a smile that revealed a chipped front tooth. "It's true. I have been asking him to appear," Preston explained to Hatrick. "You're looking for trouble inviting him into your life." Hatrick practically spat the words out. "Why don't you let Preston judge for himself?" said Seth with another grin. At this, Hatrick looked at Preston and said, "Don't say I didn't warn you about him. I'll see you again when you're making sound decisions." With those words, Hatrick disappeared into the wind. Seth and Preston stood, observing each other in silence for a beat. Chapter 17. LGBTQ+ in Church. Preston taught a confirmation class on Sundays at Wenatchee Bible Church. The smoke of this incense represents the prayers of God's people. Some traditions say that the smoke carries our prayers up to God's throne in heaven. This is frankincense, and to burn it, we place it on this hot rock. Frankincense was gifted to the baby Jesus. The position of youth intern at Wenatchee Bible Church gave Preston all kinds of benefits. He was new to Wenatchee, but through church connections, he had lots of friends, activities, and social capital. One Sunday after church, he overheard a meeting with Pastor Brandon and a congregant. "At our church, we don't marry lesbian or gay people. You're welcome to worship with us, but you're in a lesbian relationship, and you wouldn't be allowed on our leadership team." Preston had a hard time being in a church that didn't allow LGBTQ+ people to marry. The dissonance in the message of this church increasingly disturbed Preston. He eventually concluded that the LGBTQ+ people are made in God's image. God is love. Therefore, LGBTQ+ people should have the freedom to get married if they want. Why does the God of the Evangelical Church of the USA only allow straight cis people to get married? Chapter 18. Contradictions in Church. Autumn turned to winter, and winter into spring. The questions in Preston's heart and mind became daunting. He was a Christian, but increasingly felt that he couldn't believe wholeheartedly in the teachings of his straight white evangelical church. On Thursday night, he helped lead a youth group at church, but he was uncomfortable being part of an organization that didn't allow LGBTQ+ people to get married. In February 2015, Preston went for a hike with two friends. While hiking up Castle Rock, he asked his two friends, "Is it easy for you to believe in an afterlife?" A fourth voice answered, "Yes." Preston and his friends looked for the source of the fourth voice. A young man sitting off to the side of the trail had heard the question and answered. Preston was confused as to how he was having this conversation with a stranger, but continued, "You seem pretty sure of that. What's your name? Want to continue this conversation over coffee?" "My name's Nelson, and yes." With that, Preston and his two friends continued hiking along the trail, leaving Nelson. Reaching the famous Castle Rock outcropping, the three friends stood in awe at the view of the Wenatchee Valley. The mighty Columbia River cut a valley that separated Douglas and Chelan County. From here, they could see hundreds of people in cars making their way throughout the town. Later on, back at the parking lot, Preston left his phone number on the windshield of Nelson's car at the trailhead, which inevitably led them to strike up a friendship. 3 weeks later, he and Nelson were close friends and roommates. Preston was on the brink of a major life change. He felt the gravity of his consideration to leave the Christian church. It was this church that had protected, guided, and blessed him his entire life. He thought of the countless meals, travel, heartfelt friendships, and genuine love. He remembered all 4 years of high school, going on short-term mission trips, building houses in Tijuana, Mexico. Then he thought of the exclusivity, the misogyny, and the homophobia present within the church. Something deep inside told him that he may leave the Christian religion as he knows it, but that he would not require a complete abandonment of Christ. In March 2015, after several heartfelt conversations with the pastors, Preston left Wenatchee Bible Church on good terms. He decided he no longer desired to contribute to a church that condemned LGBTQ+ people. Increasingly, he was understanding God to transcend any organized religion. On his goodbye Sunday at church, as was tradition, he led a group of kids in dance during the last song. Chapter 19. New Lessons and Reiki. Preston finished cleaning out his room in the home he was moving out of. He moved his stuff to Nelson's apartment. He had previously arranged to rent an apartment with his new friend. Nelson taught Preston how to be spiritual, but not religious, and along with that, introduced Preston to lots of dangerous-sounding ideas. 1. We are eternal vibration, having a physical experience. 2. We ought to trust our own intuition. 3. Psychics can see the future. 4. Through Reiki energy healing, we are capable of healing ourselves and others. 5. God is inside each of us. The last 2 beliefs were not new to Preston, but Nelson introduced Preston to a new technique of energetic healing. This modality of healing is Reiki. It's a Japanese form of energy healing, a type of alternative medicine. Reiki practitioners use a technique called palm healing or hands-on healing, through which a universal energy is said to be transferred through the palms of the practitioner to the patient in order to encourage emotional or physical healing. Credit Wikipedia. Preston felt the same power during these sessions as when he prayed for healing and laid hands on people in the Christian church. A warm sensation in the skin and sometimes vibration accompanied these healing sessions. In the church, it was called the power of the Holy Spirit. In Reiki, it's called prana, or life-giving force. Soon after learning Reiki with Nelson, Preston sought out a school to teach him. Nelson invited Preston to a Reiki group healing session. There were 6 people in total, so 3 people lay down on the massage tables while the other 3 people healed them. Nelson and Preston were in the group that received the healing first. Preston lay down and relaxed, and with his eyes closed, he felt a warmth at the very top of his head. This warmth increased and made its way down his body, filling him with an electrifying sensation. He opened his eyes slightly to see the hands of a man hovering close to his head. The man was chanting, but in a voice too low to understand. After several minutes, they swapped places, so Nelson and Preston were standing with their heads hovering over the people lying down. As they moved their hands along the length of a person, they would pause over the person's knees or shoulders, wherever they sensed that healing was needed. While paying close attention to a person's energetic field, he clearly saw the interaction between his and another person's aura. Preston's aura swam together with Nelson's, expanding and blending like drops of watercolors falling into a glass of water. Chapter 20. Bike Trip to Cannon Beach. Preston moved into Nelson's apartment in March of 2015. In May, he rode his bicycle 850 miles, or 1,360 kilometers, in a 3-week tour from Wenatchee, Washington to Cannon Beach, Oregon, and back. While cycling, he listened to a splendid audiobook, The Celestine Prophecy. This book is a spiritual allegory in the form of one person's adventures while traveling. The book you're currently reading is inspired by books like The Celestine Prophecy. It took 4 days to reach the coast. He also listened to The Alchemist by Paul Coelho. He took great comfort in the lesson from The Alchemist, that if a person is fulfilling their journey's legend, the whole world conspires in their favor. While cycling over the coastal range of Oregon, 2 people pulled over in their car to give him food. A day later, a person at a rest stop handed him money. One day, he laid down for a nap on the side of a quiet road, and after 30 minutes, he was woken up by soft rainfall on his face. He slept in people's homes, in a dorm room, and in a 5-star hotel room at a resort, all for free. Auspicious things always happen whilst traveling. Returning to Wenatchee after the cycling trip, Preston continued working as a swim instructor, lifeguard, and a volunteer at an elementary school. Chapter 21. Summer. With the start of summer, Preston went to Yellowstone National Park with 2 high school friends, Frank and Rachel. After Yellowstone, he rode his bicycle around San Juan Island, saw orca whales from Limekiln State Park, then in Seattle, cycled naked in the Fremont Solstice Parade. He worked as a camp counselor and lifeguard at a summer camp, then spent a week backpacking on the Pacific Crest Trail with his dear friend Nelson. They camped at Tuck Lake, just south of the Stevens Pass ski resort. Chapter 22. Nelson. One day while hiking, Nelson and Preston stopped for a snack break. Nelson started to meditate after eating. After 5 minutes, Preston said, "Let's get going." Nelson kept meditating. After another few minutes, Preston just left Nelson to meditate and kept walking. These 2 friends realized that if they both had Nelson's personality, they would never get anywhere. But if they both had Preston's personality, they would never sit anywhere. Chapter 23. Chiapas. First solo travel outside the USA. Preston decided to travel to Mexico alone. He walked off the airplane at Aeropuerto Ángel Albino Corzo in the state of Chiapas, which shares a border with Guatemala. The first notable thing was the air. It was humid. There's a pungent odor, a mix of the green foliage and the river ecosystem. He arrived in Chiapa de Corzo, a small charming town on the river Grijalva, on the 1st of January 2016. Every January, this town celebrates La Fiesta Grande de Enero, a festival in which the town celebrates a legend. The story has it that many years ago, a Spanish woman brought her son to Chiapas, seeking to heal his depression. A shaman prescribed that the boy be bathed in healing mineral waters, and he was healed. To celebrate, his mother threw a party to end all parties. Preston arrived at this party feeling lucky, as if the whole town was celebrating the healing of his depression. While making photocopies, he met a beautiful young woman, Christina. The two of them went on a few dates together. Christina, like most Mexicans, was very expressive. One day, Preston told Christina the story of being on a boat tour with an extremely rude gringo. After the tour guide gave us an introduction to the boat, this tourist yelled, "No entiendo." "I don't understand." Christina exclaimed in response, "See?" her tone dipping then rising. So Preston learned to speak a very expressive and perhaps feminine Spanish. This trip was Preston's 5th to Mexico. During his first 4 trips, he went with his church on a mission trip to build houses. On this trip, he was determined to learn Spanish. Mexicans practice Schadenfreude, a German word, to laugh at someone's misfortune. This made learning Spanish in Mexico a sometimes humiliating task. Preston arrived in Chiapa de Corzo without a hotel reservation, so he knocked on the door of a family home asking for directions to lodging. He searched for the words to say he was looking for a bed. "Hola, yo necesito cama." The man who opened the door invited his whole family to watch and laugh at Preston for his poor Spanish. Preston put his hands together under his cheek and mimicked sleeping, saying, "Donde?" After having a grand laugh, the man who opened the door pointed Preston down the road to a motel. Walking down the road, Hattrick appeared, now wearing a sombrero. Hattrick took Preston's hand in hers and said, "You're about to be challenged and taught many things. These next 6 months will be intense." After obtaining a TEFL, Teaching English as a Foreign Language certificate, Preston revisited the ruins of Palenque, an ancient Mayan city in the jungle in the state of Chiapas. He was feeling a little blue, having left behind a good group of friends he'd met in Chiapa de Corzo. He went for an evening walk. The humid air surrounded him like a blanket, and there were frequent shrieks from toucan birds. The toucans flew in groups, a beautiful sight to behold. Their shrill screeches didn't match their graceful flight and bright colors. Suddenly, Seth appeared beside him and said, "How's Mexico treating you so far?" "It's been a roller coaster." The pair walked by a cow pasture, and Seth picked up a mushroom growing in a mound of cow dung. "Try this. It'll help you explore your mind." Preston had been considering the use of psychedelic drugs, and he figured that he was ready to try. "Will this help speed up my evolution as a person?" "It'll change your perceptions, and it may just advance your personal growth." 4 hours later, Preston sat in awe of the vivid green colors emanating all around him. He observed beautiful swirling patterns occurring in tree bark, and when he touched the trunk of a tree, he felt its pulse. The crickets, frogs, birds, and monkeys were all making their distinct calls. But under the influence of these mushrooms, the noises combined into one chaotic symphony. He put a blade of grass into his mouth and bit, and the bitter flavor overwhelmed him. He sprinted to his water bottle, and when he drank, the water flowing down his esophagus was the most blessed gift he could have received. He felt the water as it made its way down, reaching and cooling his stomach. At the climax of this trip, he observed the words coming out of Seth's mouth forming in the shape of long division, with 2 groups of words separated by a bar. "Walk in, straight line. Will you be fine? Sun is going down. Camp is at white sign. Who had warned you? This realm is mine. Arriving back to his tent in a campground, Preston called out to Hattrick. Hattrick, I felt like I lost control of myself. Did you eat magic mushrooms? Yes. Well, you're lucky you came out of that experience relatively unscathed. Seth may invite you to have some interesting experiences, but you'll be risking your mental stability. And not just for 12 hours either. Hattrick stepped toward Preston and wiped some sweat off his brow with a handkerchief. Hattrick then kissed Preston's forehead and said in a gentle voice, If you look for it, you'll find some guides like Seth who advise you to keep taking psychedelic medicine. But I can promise you that you will find no enlightenment in the Paisley world that you wouldn't also find sober. Psychedelic plants ought only to be consumed in the context of a ceremony hosted by a shaman of integrity. Preston opened his mouth to speak, but Hattrick continued. How can you be available to love those hurting around you when you're either lost in a glittery, bedazzled, and terrifying false reality, or trying to make sense of it once it's past? Plus, I don't want to be a guardian angel to someone forsaking common sense. Preston spoke. This first experience with a psychedelic drug was too uncomfortable. I don't desire to repeat it. I vow to spend the next 6 months sober. I won't use alcohol or Mary Jane either. With those words, Preston and Hattrick laid down to go to sleep. In Preston's dream, he met a female deity who was clothed in live animals. Kaleidoscopic patterns were emanating like ripples of water from her. She called herself the Evergreen Goddess, and she added little green stars to a boiling pot. What are you cooking? Preston asked. When she opened her mouth to answer, Preston woke up. Preston made his way to the coast of Oaxaca, Mexico, where he became a student at a Spanish school. One morning, walking toward the bus stop, Hattrick leapt from a mango tree to the ground at Preston's side. She had mango juice falling from her chin. I'm proud of you for going to Spanish school and for being sober. Isn't this a perfectly beautiful way to exist, here, in charge of your mental capacities? I do enjoy myself while substance-free, and I'm learning Spanish pretty quickly, Preston responded. You could use hypnosis methods to access higher states of consciousness, Hattrick posited. Chapter 24. Hypnosis. When Preston arrived at Spanish school, he was pleased to discover his professor was also a hypnotist. Hypnosis is the induction of a state of consciousness in which a person is highly responsive to suggestion or direction. During Spanish lessons, Preston prepared a guiding text to use in his hypnosis. He was lodged in a hostel on the beach, and he met lots of travelers who wanted to be hypnotized. Some evenings, he guided a group in past life regression. Other evenings, he spoke a guided meditation to consult with guardian angels. Preston felt very fulfilled while helping people improve their lives. After an hour-long session, Hattrick appeared at Preston's tent saying, You may want to practice some caution with hypnosis. People are very vulnerable while in a trance. They understand what they're signing up for, though. They know I'm a student. What should I do differently? I recommend you stop hypnotizing groups of people, commit to learning more about it yourself, and only then resume, Hattrick said. Chapter 25. Relapse. Preston spent 6 months sober from psychedelics, marijuana, and alcohol, and then decided to experiment again. By now, he had returned to Wenatchee and was working as a lifeguard and a swim instructor, saving up money so he could travel again. He was at a music/trade festival called Barter Fair when he placed a tiny piece of paper on his tongue, an LSD tab that was gifted to him. He stood at a concert The synchronicity with which the band played was striking. He was especially struck by the saxophone player. All around him, hippies were dancing in the hay, inhaling nitrous oxide from balloons. This drug made it difficult to stay standing, and people had their backs bent at incredible angles, contorted with their knuckles dragging along the ground like gorillas refusing to fall over. Hattrick caught up with Preston after the concert, accompanying him to his tent. She spoke with a twinge of frustration. "What do you think you will ever gain from these psychedelic drugs? Isn't your everyday life beautiful enough?" "They help me explore different realms of my imagination, and I'm not inhaling nitrous oxide, at least." "Comparing yourself to the people around you, you'll be able to justify any stupidity. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future." With that, Hattrick and Preston curled up inside Preston's tent and went to sleep. Hattrick spent a good part of the night praying for Preston. The following morning, Preston woke up and checked his Facebook. He had a private message from the mother of his childhood best friend, Calvin. She said that Calvin died. He was hiking high above Palouse Falls in Washington State. He fell, bounced off a rock, and continued falling to the river which feeds Palouse Falls. His body was recovered by a scuba diver. He rested in an eddy above the waterfall. This news distressed Preston, and he spent the entire day feeling sick to his stomach. Chapter 26. Cocaine. Preston returned to Latin America, having saved up about $5,000 working in the USA. He was in the mountains of Guatemala working at a hostel at the base of an active volcano in the town of Antigua. He went to an after-party, which was held in an empty pool in the outskirts of town. It was raining. The dance floor was covered with a white tent, onto which lasers and lights were projected. Inside the pool, he decided to try cocaine. A friend gave him some, tapping it out of a tiny bag onto the top of his hand. Preston lowered his face to his hand, centered his nose over the small white pile, and inhaled sharply. He felt a euphoria accompanied by a realization that he was being foolish. He became a more confident dancer, surprising himself with his moves. Hattrick's attention was caught the moment the cocaine went up Preston's nose. Hattrick floated down to the dance floor and observed his charge. There was an astral parasite feeding on him, attached to his aura near his shoulder. The parasite swole up like a tick. It made Preston a better dancer. Hattrick lightly tapped on Preston's shoulder. Preston suddenly realized Hattrick was near. Preston left the dance floor and stepped out into the fresh air. The gravity of this decision to try cocaine hit Preston hard. He had let himself down. "What's gotten into you? Didn't Calvin teach you some caution when he died?" Hattrick asked Preston. "I don't remember asking for your advice, Hattrick. Would you just leave me alone?" Preston snapped. A dejected Hattrick floated away into the night sky. As she soared away from Preston, she realized she might never see Preston again. Hattrick's tears mingled with the falling rain as Preston proceeded to put drugs up his nose. Chapter 27. Debauchery and Death. Preston couldn't believe how quickly he found himself addicted to cocaine. He knew in his head and heart that he was being foolish, risking his life even. But the pleasure and high outweighed his common sense. He snorted cocaine off the keys to at least 10 different hostels where he lodged. After several months without being visited by Hattrick and having irregular sleep, he realized he did miss his spirit guide. Seth made for good company, but he didn't have Hattrick's loving kindness, nor innocence. One evening, he was dancing in La Ceiba, Honduras, a town which is a gateway to the idyllic Bay Islands. He became frightened when the cocaine he snorted had very little effect on him. His body was accustomed now. He walked from the bar to his motel. He cried out to the heavens, "Hattrick, Please come back. I've been stupid. I'm not ready to quit drugs, but I desperately want to see you." He was met by silence. Then he heard a sound from behind him. Turning, his heart filled with excitement at the thought of seeing Hatrick again. Unfortunately, Hatrick was not there. The wind had made a rustling noise amidst the leaves of a bush. Preston mumbled to himself, "Hatrick is too smart to spend any more time with a fool like me." He reached his motel room depressed, brushed his teeth, and fell into a dreamless black sleep. He woke up in his motel room after only 4 hours of sleep. He checked his Facebook and read about the death of an acquaintance. Her name was Danny. She was only 20 years young, and she fell off a waterfall to the pool at the base on the Pacific Crest Trail in Oregon, USA. Preston met her whilst lifeguarding in Wenatchee, Washington. Another death. This time, a person whom he'd met once, but still, her death dealt a blow to him. Leading up to this day, Preston had been listening to lectures from people like philosopher Nick Bostrom, who argue that we likely live in a digital simulation. He closed his eyes and suddenly perceived that he was seeing through the thin veil of reality. The universe is in a constant state of consuming itself, like the Ouroboros serpent eating its own tail. Calvin, 25 years old, in Washington State, north of Oregon. He fell and died in the Palouse River, his body remaining above the falls near the precipice where the water then falls 198 feet, or 66 meters. Then a month later, Danny, 5 years younger, south of Washington State, her name starting with the next letter in the alphabet after C. She fell down the length of the actual waterfall, resting at the base. Everything between Calvin and Danny's deaths seemed to be in a direct descending order. The geographical distance north to south, their ages from 25 to 20, their names starting with letters C and D. Calvin fell but remained at the top of the waterfall. Danny fell the length of the cascade. Preston opened his eyes. At this point, he'd spent 5 years navigating the manic state associated with bipolar order. He recognized this thought as a unique observation into patterns appearing around him, while also acknowledging the impossibility of communicating it to anyone without sounding mad. The walls of his motel room had stains and scratches on them, $7 USD a night, and it was lonely staying in a motel. He was looking forward to his next job at a backpacker's hostel. He reached into his pocket and found an empty little bag which used to have cocaine in it. The weight of his poor life decisions fell around him. He had to face the grim reality that he was disappointed in himself. He packed up his things and boarded a ship to transport him to Roatan, the largest of the Bay Islands of Honduras. He arrived in Roatan to a backpacker's hostel where he had a job waiting for him. He had used the website workaway.info to find short-term jobs all over the world. The workaway model is 5 hours of work a day, 5 days a week, in exchange for room and board. He was technically a volunteer, but he received a place to sleep and food in exchange for his work. For 1 month, he worked mornings at a hostel and had most of his day free to snorkel, go on hikes, and party. He made friends with the guests at the hostel, and one client blessed him with a $100 tip. He used the tip to take the PADI open water scuba dive course, which he found quite beautiful. He swam amongst the Mesoamerican Reef, a gem which stretches 600 miles, or 900 kilometers, from Mexico to Honduras. One day, he was snorkeling alone near sunset, and suddenly, in the crystalline waters, he was surrounded in front, behind, and on both sides by tiny, self-propelling creatures, which looked like angel hair pasta, swimming in a corkscrew pattern. The beauty overwhelmed him, and he wished he could be sharing it with Hatrick. Sleeping in a shared dormitory room in hostels was always the cheaper option, but sleeping in close proximity with 7 strangers was sometimes a challenge. Preston found that, without meaning to, he would share dreams with the people nearest him. One night in Roatan, as he was falling asleep, he was awakened by 2 young women from Germany, drunk and completely naked, attempting to climb the ladder to the 2nd-story bunk bed. It was simultaneously annoying, erotic, and funny to watch. One of the women took a step up the bed's ladder, only to stumble back down. Then her friend tried hoisting her up, but to no avail. Preston laid on his side, pretending to sleep so he could take in the spectacle. After 2 months in the humid Caribbean islands, Preston was craving the cool, crisp air of the mountains, so he left Honduras and went to Matagalpa, Nicaragua. Matagalpa is a small city about 3,000 feet or 700 meters above sea level. From Matagalpa, he hitchhiked to San Ramon, where he stayed at a hostel called Gallo Vago, the Lazy Rooster. In this hostel, he met Carmen, a Maltese woman, Alex, a Mexican man, Marta, a Spanish woman, and Fabiano, a Nicaraguan man. The 4 became immediate friends. Fabiano invited the whole group to visit his family's coffee finca, or plantation, in the mountains nearby. Preston and these 3 others spent a week hiking in the lush green hills, cooking over a fire, and practicing yoga together. Preston woke up on July 1st and surprised the group by announcing that it was his birthday. Eager for an excuse to throw a party, everyone put their resources together in order to bake a cake and celebrate. One of the employees of the finca arrived completely drunk to Preston's party on his mule, an ancient alternative to the self-driving car. He played the guitar and sang, stopping only to vomit. It was moments like these that make travel so special. Sitting around a table with several candles lit, practicing Spanish and teaching English, the music of newfound friends celebrating how happy they all are to be alive. He would not have had such a memorable birthday if he had stayed in the USA. Preston continued his recreational use of cocaine in private. He felt like a raccoon, partaking in a habit he admitted was abhorrent, too shameful an act to do in plain sight. Preston missed Hattrick, but understood that Hattrick didn't like being around him when he used drugs. Preston left Nicaragua and continued making his way south through Costa Rica, where he attended a Quaker church in Monteverde, the cloud forest. In church, he met an Argentinian woman named Sylvia. She invited Preston to a contact improvisation retreat nearby. Contact improv is a style of dance in which a point of contact is established between 2 people, and then that point of contact is changed, usually slowly. He immediately felt at home practicing this style of dance. This retreat was held in a beautiful space. The dance floor was covered, but with no walls, looking out to the Guanacaste trees of the cloud forest. Rain fell, dripping down the leaves of the trees and to the humus, which covered the forest floor. He quickly found himself laying down on the wood floor with Sylvia's foot touching his shoulder. Then she moved her foot to his chest, then extended her leg along his torso. This experience was at the same time bizarre and sensual. It felt almost like an orgy, but with clothes on and without exchange of fluids. Soon there were other people, one rolling over another. Preston allowed himself to be massaged by the bodies of the people rolling over him, and he was in paradise. As the dance continued, he was lifted and spun in the arms of a man. As the man sat him down, they moved so they were resting back to back. The man bent low and scooped Preston up, this time resting against his back and shoulders. Preston let his arms fall with gravity, past the man's shoulders, until he felt the floor. He let himself slide down, and the man assisted his return to the floor. Lying flat on the floor, he was met with a woman's foot touching his leg. He lifted his other foot to make contact with the spot directly behind her knee, and she moved closer until they were both lying on their backs, with their legs extending straight up in the air, resting against the legs of the other. Their two bodies formed an uppercase T shape, upside down. They shifted, and she pulled him to a standing position. The dance became more playful, the pair spinning in a grand circle with clasped hands. The next day, he woke up in Sylvia's arms, and the two went to eat breakfast with the group. After several days of dancing in the company of this wonderful group of people, the retreat ended, and Preston continued traveling towards the border of Costa Rica and Panama. Preston flew from Panama City to Bogota, Colombia. There is no paved road, and enjoyed seeing different sights in Colombia. He continued his recreational use of cocaine. Chapter 28. Ayahuasca with Seth. Preston backpacked to the Amazon of Ecuador, where, by word of mouth, he found a shaman to administer an ayahuasca ceremony. Ayahuasca is a psychedelic plant medicine, which is a combination of root and a vine which delivers a potent dose of DMT, the chemical released in the brain naturally in the moment of birth and of death. After drinking the bitter beverage, the shaman called each attendee, there were 5 people in the ceremony, to sit at his feet while he prayed. The shaman drank a tea containing cilantro and spat it out on top of Preston's head. Returning to his bed mat, Preston felt himself gently falling into a dreamlike state. He observed a stream of water running in the mountains. He bent down on his hands and knees to drink from the stream, and the moment his lips touched the water, he became a drop of water, flowing in the stream. Then he realized he was connected to more than just the drop of water. He was one with all that made up the stream. As the water, he was picking up tiny rocks, spinning in eddies, being drank by others. He entered the mouth of a horse drinking from the water, traveled through the horse's system, and back into the stream. He felt a unity with all the water in existence. He looked around for Hattrick, but couldn't find her anywhere. Then it was dawn, and he woke from the vision. He called out, "Hattrick, please come visit me again." Then he walked alongside the others in the ceremony to a river and bathed nude. Seth appeared in the river and splashed some water onto Preston. Seth was completely dry, even as he stepped out of the river. Pulling a cigarette from his mouth, he said, "The Paisley world is splendid, isn't it? I do enjoy tripping. It's made for some profound and beautiful experiences. The more times you try these sacred plant medicines, the closer you'll understand your place in this work." Seth was cut off by a rambunctious Hattrick jumping into the river in a cannonball. Kerplunk! Once Hattrick surfaced, she spat some water out of her mouth. "Preston, how can you bear to listen to my brother?" "You ought to give him more credit. Maybe it would do you good to try ayahuasca or another psychedelic." "So, you drank the Kool-Aid. You really think you're capable of responsibly using psychedelics without them being a portal into seriously harmful drugs? Unity with all that ever was, is, or ever will be, is good for my soul." "But you knew that already. You don't need a psychedelic to teach that." "The psychedelics take that knowledge and make it experienced by all the senses." There was a pause. Preston continued, "I can tell you care about me, but I've decided to use these plant medicines. Please respect me for this decision." Hattrick responded, "I respect psychedelics in the context of ceremony, but for people like you, Preston, you already have a fragile grip on reality when you're sober. You're at risk of losing your sanity completely. The only reason you've been able to return this far to your human plane of existence is because I've been ushering you back. But each time, it's been a more arduous task to deliver you safely." Hattrick had hoped Preston would listen to her advice. Her chin began to quiver, and she said to Preston, "I only hope you stay in your right mind." You're playing a dangerous game, and I won't stop pleading with you to be sober." With that, Hatrick disappeared with a splash, and Preston gazed at Seth. "Did you and Hatrick ever trip together? Does she even know what she's missing?" "Hatrick has never tried any entheogen, and she never will," replied Seth. Preston and Seth walked together through the woods and found the vine and corresponding root to mix together to create ayahuasca. Chapter 29. Seth introduces San Pedro. After 2 nights in a row drinking ayahuasca, Preston was ready for a more gentle psychedelic experience. He went from the Amazon rainforest to the drier Andes mountains of Ecuador. He was in a small town, San Nicolas, near the city of Cuenca. He went for a walk alongside a river, and Seth appeared with a pocket knife in his hand. "It's time you meet a new plant teacher," Seth said. "I've heard some people talking about the San Pedro cactus," Preston replied. "While ayahuasca is known as the grandmother, San Pedro is known as the grandfather. It's simple to prepare, and is a more gentle experience than ayahuasca. Follow me." Seth, even in his older age, walked with agility. Preston followed his spirit guide along the small river. The two climbed up a series of boulders, arriving at a rock outcropping overlooking the river. There was a huge columnar cactus growing from a crack in the rock. "This cactus is called San Pedro because Pedro was the disciple of Christ who has the keys to the gates of heaven. Proceed only with the utmost reverence." Preston meditated for a moment and decided he felt ready to try this new plant medicine. "I feel ready to try." With his pocket knife, Seth cut a 12-inch or 30-centimeter section of the cactus. He made sure he cut a young column with no scars. He also left the flower untouched, allowing him to reproduce. Seth taught Preston how to cook the medicine, cutting out the center of the cactus, because the active ingredient is contained closer to the skin. The following day, after several prayers, Preston drank a heroic dose. The flavor is so bitter, it was difficult to keep the beverage down. 2 hours into the trip, Preston began to feel the grass under his bare feet. The sensation was more than just walking barefoot. His awareness was dripping out of himself into the ground with each step he took. Preston realized at this moment that he had several different astral beings clinging to his aura. Seth might just be one of them. The concept of Preston as a single person disappeared as he realized he was actually made up of a combination of different entities. There was a peaceful spirit who fed on calmness. There was a parasite who fed on lust. There was a spirit who spoke in foreign languages, who fed on new cultural experiences. And there was a chaotic spirit who fed on insomnia. The awareness of these different entities brought a new level of clarity to Preston's mind. He realized in this moment that these different personalities were vying for dominion, and he gave different beings control whenever he fed them. Seth appeared, and Preston looked into his eyes. The pupils of his eyes opened up, covering almost all of the color of his eye. This is a common occurrence while tripping, so Preston knew that Seth had consumed part of the batch. "I can tell you learned something important today," said Seth with a heavy exhale. "I learned that you're trying to control me." "So what if I am? Hatrick does too," replied Seth. Preston was not prepared to face this reality. "I need some time alone," he said to Seth. He walked back to his tent. He was still seeing paisley patterns in the textures on the ground. He was still tripping on the plant medicine, but he wanted to feel sober again. After brushing his teeth, he curled up in his sleeping bag and thought to himself, Was Hattrick right? Are these psychedelic plant medicines doing me any good? Am I any better off now having used them? I have no qualms admitting that cocaine is harmful to me, but are psychedelics also? He wasn't getting any clear answers, so he cried out to God, "Please guide me. I feel so lost and confused. Please help me know what is best." Preston dreamt that he was falling through a paisley-filled vacuum. Vines were entering, weaving, and dancing around Preston's falling body. Swirling around Preston were all kinds of beings, great and small. Mandelbrot figures were opening, and at each border of the Mandelbrot figure were 64 other figures, made up of watching eyes, spirals, an eye of Horus, and Mayan seals. Preston concentrated on one specific growing fractal to find Hattrick climbing out of it. Hattrick opened her mouth and with tears in her eyes said, "We haven't forsaken you." But as she spoke the last word, a flesh zipper opened up, revealing a hideous beast underneath, made up only of eyes. He repeatedly saw the ground approaching, and he braced for impact. But once he reached the ground, a crack opened, and he kept falling. "I just want to touch the wall. I just want to touch a wall. Please." Chapter 30. The 10-Day Trance. Preston had not been taking his antipsychotic medications for 4 months. This put him at risk for a complete break from reality. His use of cocaine and psychedelics only increased his likelihood of hallucinations. He managed to board a plane from Santiago, Chile, to Cancun, Mexico. From Cancun, he hitchhiked to Merida. He gave away the cash that he had and decided to wander the streets, trusting in the universe to provide a place to sleep and food. He was hallucinating regularly now, having entered into a kind of trance. He was in the Zocalo, or a downtown square, when he started preaching. He offered to pray for people, and some people permitted him to lay a hand on them and pray for them. Hattrick appeared, wrestling a coconut out of a palm tree. "You're playing a dangerous game, Preston. Wouldn't you rather be staying in a hostel again?" "I'm sure the universe will provide me with comfortable places to sleep. I don't need money." "Just beware that if you put yourself in danger, your little game will be over. For your own good, I'll be staying by your side." Later in the evening, Hattrick and Preston walked to an empty lot where they were greeted by a friendly black dog. The dog introduced herself. "My name is Vasya. All will be made well with you." Hattrick asked the dog for a place to sleep, and Vasya took them to a bed made of various pieces of trash. The three laid down and made themselves as comfortable as possible. Preston was grateful he at least felt safe sleeping there. Vasya kept watch. The next morning, Preston and Hattrick woke up. Vasya was licking a wound on Preston's leg. "I'm eternally grateful to you, Vasya," Preston said. Vasya wagged her tail and said, "We'll meet again, perhaps sooner than you expect. It's my dharma to ensure no serious harm befalls God's children." With that, Vasya trotted away. After being provided a safe place to sleep by an angel in the form of a street dog, Preston was convinced he was on a mission from God to transform society. He walked to a corner store, sat down outside, and began to sing. People gave him tips. He bought some breakfast. Later in the day, he was walking by a school when kids were being picked up by their parents. Hattrick said, "Here's an opportunity to bless someone." Preston went to a food vendor and paid for the taco of the person behind him in line. Then he found a piece of charcoal and drew a compass on a dead-end street. Instead of writing N, S, E, and W, He wrote patience, compassion, unity, and harmony. A police officer arrived in a truck and said to Preston, "Wanna come with me?" "Yes." The police handcuffed Preston and put him in the back seat of his truck, lowering the passenger seat so that the headrest applied pressure against his torso. His movement was completely restricted. Hattrick, invisible to the police, jumped into the seat next to Preston. The policeman began to drive and spoke. "Why are you drawing a compass in my neighborhood?" "Because I've been sent to take your job away." "Oh, so who do you belong to?" "My boss is wealthier and more powerful than yours." "How many gringas can you get me? How much money can you pay me?" "I've been sent by the Most High God to establish world peace." At this point, the cop got a call on his radio. "Officer Gomez, do you have the gringo in a purple shirt?" "Yes," he replied. "He bought lunch for my son after school today. Let him go, he's harmless." Hattrick gave Preston a wink as the cop took the handcuffs off. Preston sang this song to the police officer. "Oh, my Heavenly Father, please let me be an instrument of your love." The cop clapped and cheered as Preston walked away. Hattrick grabbed Preston by the shoulders and said, "We got lucky there, but we don't know if we'll be so lucky next time. Please act with prudence from now on." Preston was so high in his mania, he was convinced he could do no wrong. He was also convinced that he was immortal. Preston and Hattrick spent the next few days walking around the city of Mérida. By this point, he had lost all of his belongings, including money and passport. Preston sat down on a park bench and saw a man walking from his car to a small business. He had a children's gift bag in his hand. He placed the gift at the feet of a man sitting outside of the business and left. The hairs on the back of Preston's neck stood up. Hattrick observed the scene also and said to Preston, "The cartels have a way of warning their enemies. We just watched two men from rival gangs. One of them threatened the other by placing a child's birthday gift at his feet. If this man does not comply with the wishes of his rival cartel, they'll kill his youngest child." The gift symbolizes his child's final birthday. Preston could see a palpable fear and torment in the eyes of the man who had just received this gift. Preston was so disgusted to see this act being carried out, he realized he had to put a stop to society. He took off his shorts and shirt and danced naked in a busy intersection, stopping traffic. Cars were honking at him and trying to go around him. Hattrick pleaded with him to relax, but Preston was convinced it was his mission to stop traffic. "They'll take you to jail for this," Hattrick yelled. But Preston was determined. 5 minutes later, a group of 5 police officers pulled Preston out of the street onto the sidewalk. They pinned him down so he could not move. "This society is insane! Everyone has to stop! Where's Hattrick?" Preston yelled. "We'll be able to help you find Hattrick if you calm down," responded a female police officer in a soothing voice. Eventually, Preston relaxed, and the police took him to jail. As he entered a jail cell, Preston was calm. He felt like everything was going according to plan. In Mérida, the name for a jail cell for drunks is called the torito, little bull. He was let into a torito, which contained 11 men. Once the door was locked, Preston said, "I wish to speak with the president of my country, Donald Trump." This was in 2017. Within a few minutes, a voice came through to Preston's cell, in Spanish of course, saying, "This is Donald Trump. Please help me get out of jail, Mr. President. And why not come to Mexico for a vacation? Instead of building a wall, why not create a safe pathway for immigration? Society has to go through a revolutionary shift, and you could be part. The weight of the power under my reign is too much sometimes. let us establish a more equitable distribution of governance. I hereby invite you to join my team in the White House." Thrilled at having been selected for a position in the White House, Preston said goodbye to Trump and sat down. A fellow inmate pointed to the two other inmates and explained to Preston, "Those two guys over there, Jose and Pablo, are powerful people. Be careful not to mess with them. They belong to a cartel." Then a guard instructed Preston to follow him to a different cell. "Just don't put me near Jose and Pablo, please," Preston said. The guard put his arm around Preston's neck and started choking him. Preston reached to pull away the guard's arms, but to no avail. His head was cradled in the space between the guard's upper and lower arm. Preston wasn't even able to reach his fingers around the guard's arm, which was tightening like a boa constrictor around its prey's neck. Just as the edges of his vision began turning black, the guard stopped choking. It lasted only a few seconds. Preston realized he had made a big mistake in asking to not be placed near Jose and Pablo. Finally, Preston was placed into a different jail cell with other inmates. A guard gave Preston a cup of water, and a few minutes after drinking, Preston was lying face down, with his head very close to the hole in the ground used as a toilet. He was experiencing something similar to sleep paralysis. He was aware that he was lying down on a filthy floor, but he was not capable of moving from the position. Then he had a vision. A deity who called herself the Evergreen Goddess appeared. There were bright lights and kaleidoscopic patterns emanating from behind her, and she had a live fox draped around her shoulders. She beckoned with one arm, and by her side appeared a glowing portal. Inside, Preston saw a collection of memories, which he recognized as his own, taking a pre-human form of light. This concentrated light communicated with the Evergreen Goddess. "Wouldn't taking human form mean sorrow, pain, and death?" "Alongside joy, bliss, and abundant life." The collection of light began undulating, then grew and entered Preston as he observed. The Evergreen Goddess said, "Every circumstance you encounter has been chosen by you before your birth. You will make it out of jail in one piece, and you will go on to accomplish great things." After she delivered this message, she disappeared, and Preston managed to stand up. No more victim mentality. He realized that any hardship he encountered was handpicked as a lesson. Not only that, but he chose exactly how to learn each lesson, so he could never despair that he didn't ask to be born. The concrete floor he stood on began to rotate, as if it were sitting on ball bearings. After making one 180-degree spin, a platform separated from the floor, and Preston was lifted up, as if on a rapid elevator. He rose higher and higher, until he was met with a wall of windows. The platform he was standing on moved slowly in front of the windows. Peering through one window, he saw his childhood self opening gifts on Christmas morning. In the next window, he saw a team of 3 climbers scaling Tungurahua, a volcano in Ecuador. In the next window, he saw a group of salsa dancers on the dance floor of a club. In the next window, he saw a fight take place between 2 Thai men in a ring. In the next window, he saw a Chinese woman leap from a diving board into a pool. The awesomeness of what he was seeing was overwhelming. Preston found it too beautiful to take in. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he peered through a window and saw a dinosaur walking in a tropical jungle. In the following window, he saw his parents exchange their first kiss. He didn't bother asking how or why he was transported from a jail cell in Mexico into this interdimensional hallway. "Hattrick, are you seeing this?" Preston yelled. Hattrick appeared at Preston's side on the cement platform. "Wow, Someone decided to let you peek behind the curtain." Preston and Hattrick were side by side now, and they were transported to a window where they observed Preston under the influence of cocaine. He could see an astral parasite latched onto him. The parasite grew when he used more cocaine. Preston gazed to his right and left. The interdimensional hallway stretched without end in all directions. Each window displayed a different time and place, so Preston realized he was observing this from eternity. Preston was filled with regret for having spent so much time and resources putting drugs into his body. The platform he was standing on lowered, and eventually he found himself back in the jail cell. "Hattrick, was that a hallucination, or did that just happen?" asked Preston as he felt the texture of his own face. "Even if it was a hallucination, it doesn't make it any less real. The cracked mind of the schizophrenic lets light in that others cannot see," Hattrick replied. Preston looked around. Outside of the bars of the cell appeared a man and a woman dressed in nice clothes. They stood there and invited the entire jail cell's inhabitants to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. The woman said, "Everyone has a role to play. Alcoholics are receptors of a certain sensitivity and intelligence that ruins us." Preston heard the man speaking Spanish with a gringo accent, so he stood up to talk to him. The man from AA spoke to Preston in English. "Years ago, I was in a jail cell myself. The 12 steps restored me to sanity. All it takes is to walk in a straight line." He handed Preston a pamphlet from AA and left. Preston held his head against the bars to see where the man was walking. There were arrows painted on the floor. Hattrick said, "Tomorrow they'll let you out of jail. Just stay calm and stay out of trouble, and they will release you." Preston eventually went to sleep, cuddling and being cuddled by fellow inmates for warmth. A guard at the jail asked Preston for the phone number of a family member. He gave his father's cell number. A few hours later, a man and a woman from Yucatan Giving Outreach, an actual non-profit organization in Mérida, Yucatan, Mexico, picked him up and took him to a motel. "We contacted your father, and he will be here in 2 days to take care of you. You will wait at this hotel we booked for you." Preston made himself comfortable in the motel. He called out to his imaginary friend, "Hattrick, what on earth is happening?" Hattrick, existing in a light body, walked right through the door without opening it. "You went off your medications. You took drugs. You ended up losing your mind. You danced in traffic, and the police took you to jail for your own good. Now your father is on his way to get you back on your feet." This recap hit Preston hard. "I feel like such a screw-up." Hattrick took a good, long, hard look at Preston and said, "Well, you are to blame. You're experiencing consequences for your own decisions, but that doesn't mean that you should waste any time beating yourself up. As long as you learned something from this ordeal, it was time well spent." With these words, Preston looked at Hattrick with greater love and appreciation than he'd ever felt before. He stood up and stepped toward Hattrick. Hattrick wrapped her arms around him, and in her embrace, he lost his strength and crumbled like a log burnt in a fire. Hattrick opened her arms, and the two danced contact improvisation, their favorite style of dance. Tears were falling from both their eyes. Where Hattrick's tears landed on Preston's shoulder, he felt a warm, healing light enter him. Chapter 31. The final battle between Hattrick and Seth. Preston went to sleep in the motel room. In his dream, he was standing at the edge of the crater of Volcano Masaya in Nicaragua. 500 feet, or 150 meters below, lava was bubbling and bursting from a vent, creating a toxic, foul, deadly cauldron. Seth appeared. At the edges of his form, the wind was pulling particles of him away. His skin had an almost green hue, and his prickly beard was completely white. He was smoking a stogie which, as long as he smoked it, never diminished in size. Seth climbed over a small wall at the edge of the crater, saying, "I've grown weak without any attention from you, but my strength is still greater than Hatrick's. It's time for the final battle between us. The winner will have dominion to channel you for the rest of your life." "Okay," replied Preston. Seth was expecting Preston to insist that they could coexist, hoping Preston would not be agreeable to the battle, but Preston understood that this was for the best. Seth thought to himself, "Curses. That plan backfired. I can no longer use reverse psychology on Preston." Preston spoke to Seth. "What will happen to the loser?" "They won't die, but rather they will fall into a deep sleep, which could last hundreds of human years, before being awoken by the right being to channel." Preston stepped a few feet away from Seth and called out to Hatrick. "It's time for one last battle between you and Seth. The winner will be channeled by me for the rest of my life." Usually, Hatrick arrives before Preston even finishes calling her. But today, there was no sign of Hatrick. Preston scanned the gray, wrathful-looking clouds collecting over the steaming sulfurous air pouring out of the caldera. Still, nothing. "Hatrick? Don't you care anymore?" "No need for battle if I'm the only one who answers your call anyway. Just stop calling out to Hatrick, and I'll win by default," Seth replied. A few minutes passed. The thick sulfur in the air was making Preston lightheaded. Light mist was falling from the gray and black clouds overhead. It was at once hot from the heat of the lava rising, and cool when the mist touched their skin. As Seth and Preston scanned the surroundings, a form began to appear inside a gray rain cloud. Ash aphids, the tiny flies Preston remembered from childhood, appeared in clusters. Then, a bolt of lightning escaped from the gray cloud overhead. A torrential downpour fell. The rain was falling so thick that the silhouette of Hatrick was barely visible as she leapt from the cloud, pulling pranic energy toward herself as she gracefully descended. It was as if all things close to Hatrick were being pulled into her, their edges vibrating and distorting. A starling bird landed in the pocket of her tunic, and a wand soared in her direction, landing in an open hand. As Hatrick descended, Seth said, "She's spending too much energy on theatrics. This battle will be over soon." The fight began with both Hatrick and Seth meditating with their palms open. Energy was visibly gathering and entering both of them, as if a semi-translucent funnel were pulling prana from the air. Surrounding Seth's aura was a star of 6 points rotating slowly. A single flower budded above his head. The 6 petals of the flower each ended in a sharp point, with drops of liquid hanging from the end. One drop grew and then fell, and as it descended toward the ground, it morphed into a venomous spider with green and black legs. In the space near Hatrick, it was as if she had her own gravitational force. The pebbles and shrubs were being pulled in, collecting in a mandala, which began at her crossed feet and expanded out. A group of ash aphids flew to the space above her head, changing shape from a perfect sphere to a rotating spiral. Without speaking, both Seth and Hatrick stood up, acknowledged each other, and began fighting. They both had visible auric shields around them. Hatrick's was blue, while Seth's was green. Hatrick raised a hand and twisted it, pointing towards Seth. sending a diminishing spell to Seth's shield. Seth disappeared, reappearing seconds later behind Hatrick, his shield untouched. The green spider had snuck closer to Hatrick, and now jumped through her shield, biting Hatrick's arm. Hatrick winced and easily sent the spider back to Seth, minding to not hurt it in the motion of her cast arm. Following the spider were a bunch of ash aphids in the form of an arrowhead, piercing Seth's shield and striking his waist. They shot straight through Seth, leaving him wounded. Hatrick chanted, "Viento, vientito!" and a gust of wind brought hot, sulfuric air from the caldera to Seth and enclosed him in a small whirlwind. Seth's movements became restrained as he struggled against the spiral. Seth waited, then threw his arms around, casting away the whirlwind easily. He countered, speaking Huachuma Belea, and the sharp spines of a nearby cactus simultaneously flew to Hatrick from all directions, piercing Hatrick's exposed legs and arms. Tiny drops of blood appeared all over Hatrick. Preston became aware that the winner of this battle ultimately would be the spirit he fed. When he looked toward Hatrick with love, Hatrick's power augmented. He remembered countless nights with insomnia, being caressed, and having a lullaby sung to him by Hatrick. Then, Preston looked to Seth with carnal desire, reminiscing the many hours spent together, taking all manner of drugs, feeling sensations he had never known prior. Seth's power increased, while Hatrick's diminished. As Preston felt more love for Seth, he actually grew fuller, taller, stronger, his sunken cheeks expanding like a swollen tick. Preston didn't want either of them to lie dormant, but he knew that this was his only choice. Finally, Preston gazed at Hatrick. Her beautiful face was speckled with drops of blood from where the cactus needles punctured. She kept a serene, focused gaze on her face as all manner of debris flew around her. Preston saw Seth gaining power as his own desire for pleasure increased. Hatrick looked to Preston, her gaze going past Preston's eyes and through to his heart. "I won't let you take him from me," Hatrick said to Seth. Now, looking again to Preston with streaks of blood coming down her fragile face, Hatrick said, "Remember the difference between pleasure and bliss. I'll offer you the second." Her words formed a visible equation, and as she spoke, Preston looked closer into Hatrick's eyes. In the reflection of her wet eyes, Preston noticed the figure of Vasya, the dog from the streets of Merida. Vasya had run all the way here. Vasya stood near Hatrick, her hackles raised, puffing up her already impressive form. She pointed her nose toward Hatrick and gazed at her with affection in her eyes, drawing Preston's attention to his guardian angel. With this action from Vasya, Preston knew Hatrick was right. He knew he'd rather have Hatrick than Seth. Preston remembered soft kisses on his cheek from Hatrick, remembered Hatrick's loving gaze during each milestone of his life. He remembered how days ago Hatrick slept in filth on the streets of Mexico with Preston. Hatrick's love for Preston was not romantic. It was deeper somehow, a type of love only shared between angel and human. Seth's form diminished as Preston thought of Hatrick. Preston looked at Seth, and his lips curled into a subtle smile of goodbye. Seth's six-pointed star descended until it engulfed him in a paisley, psychedelic embrace, and Seth's eyes closed. "Sweet dreams," Preston said. With that, Seth fell asleep and disappeared into nothing. Hatrick stepped to Preston. Preston knelt and used his sleeve to wipe blood from Hatrick's exposed skin, moving up her body. Behind the blood, Hatrick's skin healed itself, leaving no scar. After cleaning her face, Preston embraced his guardian angel, kissing her cheek and holding on to the back of her head. Preston woke up, taking several moments to register what just happened in his dream. Chapter 32. Returning to Sanity. After 2 full days waiting in the motel, Preston's father Daryl arrived in Merida, and Yucatan Giving Outreach coordinated their reunion. After a big, long hug, Daryl and Preston went to a pharmacy together where they purchased risperidone, an antipsychotic drug which Preston was already familiar with. Then they went to the U.S. Embassy, where Preston was issued a temporary passport. The father and son did some sightseeing as well. The week-long trance was over. Merida is a beautiful city full of Mayan art and architecture. After 4 days together, Daryl was confident that Preston was back on his feet, so he flew back to the USA. Preston paid for his father's trip, which was fair. Preston spent the next several days adjusting to being medicated again. In people diagnosed with bipolar order, having to take medications can be traumatizing. Bipolar order used to be called manic depressive because it's characterized by phases of mania followed by phases of depression. The manic phase is fun. Limitless energy, little to no sleep necessary, and delusions of grandeur are typical. Whereas depression is the opposite, a lack of drive and a general feeling of hopelessness. He spent the Christmas holiday with some dear friends, the McCormicks, who were vacationing in the Yucatan Peninsula. They went to the tiny town of El Cuyo together. El Cuyo is a beachside village with picturesque palm trees towering over the vacation bungalows. Preston was no longer hallucinating. While building a sandcastle with the McCormicks, Hattrick appeared and helped build a bridge over a moat. She laid down a cup and packed wet sand on top of it. Then she removed the cup, and there was the bridge. Preston said to her, "Thank you for keeping me alive during that crazy week. I promise to never be so foolish again." Preston was issued a temporary passport by the U.S. Embassy, which gave him 3 months to return to the USA. He spent a week in Sayulita, on the Pacific coast, with family. Then he visited friends in Guadalajara, Mexico City, San Miguel de Allende, and Morelia. He knew his travels in Mexico were coming to an end, but he had no plan for what to do once he returned to the USA. In the border town of Nuevo León, he walked across the border back into the USA after a year abroad. He spent 1 night in León, Texas, with a host from Couchsurfers. Then he took a bus to Yakima, the town where his parents live. Chapter 33. Resolution. Hattrick held Preston's hand as they walked across the Rio Grande, which divided Texas with Mexico. "Get ready for some culture shock. It can be very difficult to return home after being abroad for a year," Hattrick said. Preston had found a healthy balance now. He found a sleep aid that didn't extinguish the light in his eyes. He found the courage to dance and have fun without consuming drugs. And he understood that while many different spirits will always be vying for control, he had control of the spirits whom he welcomed and fed based on his lifestyle. He fed Hattrick by going to sleep early, waking up early, studying foreign languages, singing, meditating, and achieving natural highs through exercise and hypnosis. In his parents' home, he found a kaleidoscope built by his father. Holding it up to the light, he let the confetti fall, and he marveled at the beautiful art available while sober. He made a promise to himself, saying, "I'll find the beauty in this world while staying in my right mind." On the other side of the kaleidoscope was Hattrick, mouthing those exact words. The end. This has been Kaleidoscope. Written by Preston Wade. Narrated by Brandon Visser. Produced by visservoice.com.